Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of In Conversation Live, presented by the Royal Society of Medicine. I'm Roger Kirby, current president of the RSM, and lovely to have you with us this evening. Tonight, we've got Air Vice-Marshal Simon Edwards, senior officer in the RAF. Simon joined the RAF in 1990 through a sixth-form scholarship scheme. He's an air transport pilot, initially flying the Hercules C-130 and the C-17 Globemaster, which are large military aircraft designed to perform tactical and strategic airlift missions. He's also a qualified flying instructor. He gained his parachutist wings in 2016, and we'll ask him a bit about that parachuting. He did staff tours, but have been focused on joint and capability areas at the MOD and Air Command. He, graduating from the Royal College of Defence Studies in the summer of 2017, he worked in the Cabinet Officer as policy advisor in the National Security Secretariat, and he's been promoted to Air Vice Marshal in just May 2021, and he's returned to the MOD as Assistant Chief of the Air Staff, dealing with strategy. So, hi Simon, thank you so much for joining us. I often describe this as kind of Desert Island Disc without the music. And in Desert Island Disc, they always say, tell us about your background and what kind of made you what you are now. So let's go back to, age 16 or even before that. Yeah. What kind of attracted you to the RAF?
Well, first of all, good evening, Roger. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. It really is quite a privilege, so I'm really grateful. So my story, I guess, I was an air cadet, like so many of us are. 14-year-old me joined the air cadets, quite like putting on a uniform, polishing my shoes and being a part of something. And then, you get to go flying. Back in those days, it was in a Chipmunk. These days, and it's something a little more modern, which I really, really liked. I remember feeling the thrill of going flying. I'd never been on an aircraft, not even an airliner before, and the opportunity to get your hands on an aircraft and do something with it was quite special. It made an impact on me. But I never thought I'd be a pilot, and the reason I say that is I always thought it was something other people did. Do you know what I mean? It's that feeling of out of reach. Other people do that, don't they? I've been to air shows, seen aircraft, seen the Reds, all of that, but beyond my sphere of what I had in mind for my own life. And then a friend of mine, actually quite important, decided to apply for what was called a sixth form scholarship when he was 16. And I thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And the Air Force were offering these things to people who were interested in joining, and if you got one of these scholarships, they would give you a place at Cranwell, officer training, as in the job that you'd applied for, in this case, pilot. So I went with him to the careers office in Blackpool. I remember I had to look smart, so I wore a Puma shell suit and my best trainers, and they spoke to me and they let me fill the forms in, they let me apply. And before I knew it, I'd been through selection, I got a place, and I was at sixth form studying for A-levels with a place in the Air Force ready to go. All I needed to do was pass. And they gave me a pilot's license too when I was 17, so I could fly before I could drive. And I remember taking my friends flying, and we flew over our school during lunchtime one day, which is quite funny. So there you go. The Air Cadets is what I've got to thank for this. And then my good friend who believed in himself more than perhaps I believed in me, but I went with him and it paid off. So yeah, there you go.
And then I guess you're a Lancashire lad. Were you brought up in Lancashire? You still got a bit of an accent, a northern accent. Yeah?
Kinda. My family, my mother's maiden name is Anfield, and we're from Merseyside. Really, I grew up in a town called Skelmersdale, which is right on the Lancashire Merseyside border. So you're quite right. I'm from that neck of the woods. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, and did you ever feel any fear when you were flying? I'd actually be terrified to fly an airplane. I don't mind driving a car, but I would find it terribly scary. All those knobs and buttons and switches and stuff.
Yeah, there's nothing scary about flying, not at all. Not when you're well trained and you got good kit. It's more like I've been more terrified when I've been parachuting. Jumping out of an aircraft is far more scary than flying one. Anyone who abandons a serviceable aircraft needs to have a little look at themselves. So yeah, I found parachuting more scary than flying. Yeah.
Well, let's just talk about parachuting, and then we'll go back to that. I mean, you've got your parachutist wings. Does that mean you've got to have done so many jumps to get your parachutist wings?
Yeah, it does. I mean, first of all, it's a badge, right? People like badges, certainly the military. But that stems from quite late in my career. When I was a station commander, so the most senior officer looking after an RAF base called Brize Norton in Oxfordshire, which just so happens to be our largest base. And that's home to the Air Mobility Force, so all the aircraft that you just mentioned and more. It's also home to military parachuting. It's where any military parachutists will learn their trade. And that meant that not only was I responsible for the safety and the risk to life of air mobility operations and aircraft, I was also responsible for exactly the same on parachute training, including very, very high technical merit activity that our elite forces do. And a lot of the issues that we would often look at when things didn't go well, we were managing risk, right? Would often be, we would try and put them down to training. Have they been trained right? Does it look right? What can we learn? And I found myself having to have an opinion and a view on that, having never done it myself. So I went and got my wings, which is, it's only 6 jumps, right? Static line, I remember, but the last one is in night with all your equipment. So I did it because I wanted to really understand what other people were having to do that I then had to take a view on. And I found that really quite helpful. I could have much better conversations about how to make sure people could get the job done. So yeah, there you go.
And then in your training, I guess there comes a point where you have to decide whether you're a fighter pilot or you fly the transport. Those massive Hercules airplanes that we see, like people loading tanks onto and God knows what else onto. I mean, talk me through that. I mean, does everybody want to be a fighter pilot, or did you decide that you wanted to fly the bigger airplanes out of preference? How did that work?
Well, first of all, I need to correct you that Hercules isn't massive. I always thought Hercules was massive until I flew a C-17.
Right.
But we'll come back to that. Just the ramp at the back of a C-17 carries the entire payload that a Hercules can carry. It's quite remarkable, the difference. It doesn't mean they don't have an exceptionally valuable role to play, depending on the task at hand, mind you, don't get me wrong. But no, so for me, I think like most people in my position, I mean, I was inspired by Top Gun, right? And I wanted to be a fast jet guy, and who doesn't love the Red Arrows and the Harrier and all of that stuff. And so very much my ambition was to find my way to a frontline fast jet cockpit. I mean, that was absolutely what I was hoping for. But not everybody gets there. I got pretty close. What we call simulated attack profiles at Weapons and Tactics School at Chiverney on the Hawk. And then it was just a bit much, frankly. I wasn't up to it. The simplest way of putting it was that even if I got to the front line, I'm not sure I would have lasted very long. So I think what happens in flying training in the military, actually, do you know what? I think it happens in any trade or branch or role or profession in the Air Force, is you end up, the right job finds you. That's certainly what happened to me. So when I wasn't up to the role of fast jet pilot, you end up looking for other options. I got restreamed to multi-engine, and I never looked back. I mean, I absolutely love it. And you find yourself, of course, delivering serious military missions that really do matter, and the aircraft you fly starts to matter less. It's about the contribution that you make, and I've not regretted for 1 minute where I've ended up, and I really do love every day in the job that I've had, every job.
And you're now in strategy back in Whitehall, but you have when we come on to talk about that, I'd be really interested to hear a bit about that and the way that the RAF interacts with the other armed forces, the Army and the Navy and so on. But let's talk about Afghanistan, because I mean, maybe starting with what everybody is focused on just a few months ago, the evacuation, because those big aircraft that you had were loading on troops in the capital of Afghanistan, weren't they, with all the mayhem around it? I mean, were you actually out there involved in that, or you were kind of supervising it? What talk us through that?
So I had no role in delivering that campaign. I was an exceptionally proud Vice-Marshal in the Ministry of Defence, watching it unfold before me, and seeing my old squadron and my old mates doing what they do best, right?
Right.
And let's be clear, alongside the Army too. And I'm not sure everyone realises just what a massive cross-government effort actually that was to pull off that remarkable evacuation that happened. But no, I mean, what they were doing there was incredible. I mean, we had the C-17, our biggest aircraft, the A400M, our newest aircraft, the C-130, hugely reliable tactical aircraft, all of those aircraft doing their thing. And tactical, you mentioned earlier, tactical and strategic, what does that really mean? Well, tactical air mobility, for me, is where you're going somewhere where there either isn't a runway or there isn't an airfield, and you're doing things that normal aircraft simply cannot. And that is exactly what was going on in Kabul. The lights were out. There's no control of the airfield like you would normally expect. You saw the pictures on the media of some of that. And so to see the guys see the team going in there as they did into an unknown circumstances, so professionally and so well, was just incredible. And then you will have all seen the humanity and the compassion then that the crews dealt with in getting the people out of there. And some of the decisions that people had to make, spot decisions on the ground to get that job done, quite remarkable too. I mean, I don't know if you've seen some of the pictures again in the media where you see what looks like far too many people down the back of an aircraft. Well, it really was far more people than you would actually expect. These are freighter aircraft that they haven't put seats in them, and people are sitting on the floor to get as many people out of there as need to get lifted when the aircraft's ready to go. And all of that, I'm just in huge admiration for the calm, professional, measured way they got more than 15,000 people out in about 150 sorties or so. It's the biggest airlift the Air Force has faced since Berlin after the Second World War. Quite remarkable. And I'm very much looking forward to every time I have a touch with anyone who's engaged in it. I just want to say thanks, and they make me feel incredibly proud to have the heritage of the squadron and the heritage of air mobility. But I cannot and will not take any credit for what they did, because they did it, and they should be enormously proud. It was brilliant.
And how did it work with the Americans and the British there together? Because the Americans must have had more aircraft there. They shifted out a lot more people, probably, didn't they? And I mean, was it harmonious, the relationship between the Brits and the Yanks, as it were? There, do you know? Were you?
Yeah, well, it's a team effort. I mean, I commanded Kandahar back in 2011. It was a NATO mission, and I commanded the UK element of Kandahar airfield. So, and it had an American commander, and that whole spirit of working together in a team to get the mission done is true of actually all of the partner nations in Afghanistan. But there's no smoother ally or better partner than the US and the UK. We work together incredibly well. And from what I saw of the evacuation, it played out precisely as you would expect. Good communication between the two, clear lines of who's doing what. And actually with the UK and the US working together, that's how they created the environment where so many aircraft got in and out and so many people were withdrawn. So it sounds like it's a strap line, but it's true. It's a partnership, It's absolutely a partnership. And so you had UK and US enabling the evacuation, and of course other nations going into getting in and out to get their own people out. So no, I'm sure there were tensions, right? It's a military operation. There's always going to be, you know, unexpected issues and calls and what you reckons, but no reason to think it didn't go extremely smoothly. It's remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been. I think we all remember those pictures of people clinging to the aircraft, and then just huge numbers of people sitting on the floor of those transporters. So we've got a few questions coming in. Thank you so much, everybody, for questions. Do send them in. Got a good opportunity to ask questions from an Air Vice-Marshal. So let's start with one. David McKinley says, have you ever been to St. Clement Danes Strand, the central church of the RAF? And can you comment on their memorial books? Have you been there?
Yeah, so St. Clement Danes is extremely important to the Royal Air Force. I've been there many times, not only for kind of Founders Day and various events, but of course it's also where it matters spiritually to the Air Force for so many reasons, because it's where we lay up our squadron standards, which are the big silk flags that squadrons get awarded when they stand up. And so when a squadron disbands, the standard gets laid up in the church where, and other places too. They can be laid up at RAF Cranwell too, I think, but fundamentally that's where they go. And it's a kind of a place of rest and holding and reflection for all of that. So I'm hugely aware of the importance of the centrality of the church to our heritage and what it means. So yeah, I go there. I take it very seriously. In fact, right now we know we need to invest in the church. It needs work like churches do. And we're just about to start off in a campaign to get the funding and the support we need together for that. So that's going to be one of the things I'm going to be looking at in the next 12 months for sure. Not least because my current role includes RAF heritage, right? And what it means to us. And that's all a huge part of that. The memorial books themselves, yeah, they matter. They really do. They matter as much as all of the fabric of that church matters. It's more important than I think many people realise, that church to our service and our ethos.
Okay, so Harvey Markovich says this question arises from our village pub last weekend. He wants to know why you call spoons, he says.
Okay, so for that, you have to invite me to your pub. The reason that question came from a pub is because that's where it needs to be asked and answered. Well, I will say it's a nickname I quite like. I've been called it for many years, and it stems from me being super keen, ultimate Boy Scout warrior teacher's pet, which doesn't always go down so well and makes you vulnerable to Mickey taking. But it's a longer story, which I will happily regale. If that member of the audience would like to get in touch with me and want me for a beer, I will find my way there.
Well, he'll have to buy the beer, or she'll have to buy the beer. Okay, Andrew McCutcheon says, how can a large number of passengers be safely transported in a freighter without seats? Did the crew have harnesses, cargo nets, or other means of restraint? I mean, you had a load of people loaded in the back of that aircraft sitting there. I mean, was that safe?
So it's about risk, isn't it? It's about what do you need to get done and what risk you're prepared to take. So I think it was best described as a managed risk. So yes, it's safe, but had that aircraft, let's be honest, had that aircraft had a major incident, then it would have been messy down there. Yeah. So what you've got going on there is people having to make risk balance judgments. I mean, don't forget, at one point there were bombs going off, there was gunfire, there was chaos, there was a desperation, and so what we do is we take the risks that we need to take, and what you'll find there is people doing the right thing, getting as many people on board as they can. They did what they could, and this was planned. But we've done this before. I think that's important. We've had to do evacuation like this before. Where we've approached it in a very similar way. So we weren't making it up, but we knew that we can get people on calmly if they sit down, We then give them a strap to hold on to. We can get a lot of people on there, far more than normal. But then importantly, you're quite right to notice that that's not as safe as you would normally expect in a normal situation. And so you take the risk for the minimum amount of time. So those aircraft were getting airborne out of Afghanistan and they weren't coming back to the UK. They were only going as far as safety. In this case, I'm not sure, to the Middle East, where they were then transferred onto a Voyager aircraft, which is our Airbus A330 derived transport tanker aircraft, fabulous aircraft. And then for that long trip home, they were in an airliner, just like you would expect.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it's not. Is it safe? Yeah, it's safe enough for the situation that the crews were presented with. Were they making it up as it go along? No, it was a managed risk. We knew the risk we were taking, and it made sense at the time, and it worked. And yes, the crew would have been absolutely strapped in. The captain up front would have been in the normal situations you would expect because he could be.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I got a nice diversity question here. You know, we're very focused on diversity and inclusion at the RSM. We're working hard at it. But Victor Robinson, thank you, Victor, for this question. He says, as an old truckie who left the RAF in 1997, I'm incredibly proud of the progress the RAF has made in its treatment of women and gays. Could you comment on how this amazing change took place? That's, I think, an interesting question.
Yeah, so diversity matters immensely. We can always do more, I think, but we definitely recognise that we have to reflect the society that we serve. And so to do that, we have to represent all of the LGBTQ+ community. We have to represent gender. We have to represent race. Any of the, well, you know, any of those diverse characteristics. Social mobility matters, cognitive diversity matters, how people think, all of that. And what I would say is the Air Force is enormously proud of the fact that all of our roles are open to women, and that when it comes to sexuality or background, race, any of that, we don't care about that. We care about, what I mean by that is we care about you. We care about what you bring and what you offer. Of course, we care about your background, but what I mean is it's not an issue. It's certainly not a constraint in any way. We just don't see it that way. And I'm so happy that it's like that. I mean, I joined in 1990. You couldn't be a homosexual and join the Royal Air Force. If you were female, woman, you couldn't be a pilot. If you fell pregnant, you had to leave. All of that is well behind us now, and it's been remarkable actually how far we've come. But we've got so much more to do. I mean, at the moment our targets are just on gender equality, and actually it's quite careful. If all you focus on is gender diversity, you can forget to focus on all the other aspects of diversity. But nevertheless, a point worth making is, you know, we're dead set on our current target is for 40% females in the next few years. I'm afraid I don't have at the top of my head the figure, but it needs to be better than that. You know, the UK is 51% female, and so that should be our target, surely. So I think the service has grown up as society has grown up, and although we might not reflect society in terms of how diverse society is versus how diverse we are, we're growing up at a rate that at least means that we're onto that, and we will get there.
God, I've got so many questions coming in. Thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, please do send them in.
I thought I was going to be able to talk about me. You've sold me a kipper here. This is not good.
There's one. Is it normal to become an Air Vice-Marshal at such a young age? Is the question. But talk us through Air Vice-Marshal, Air Chief Marshal, etc., etc. How just the ranks in the RAF, and how did you get? I mean, you look pretty young, Simon, but I know you're not as young as you look. You're actually a bit older than that. But talk us through, you know, the career structure and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, of course. I'll be happy to. So the two kind of rank structures, if you like, there's commissioned and non-commissioned. So the non-commissioned ranks are from what we call aircraftsmen, but that will be changing. So the junior aviators all the way through to what's called a warrant officer. And that's one tier of our structure. And then in the officer cadre, it starts, I joined, I was an acting pilot officer. Honestly, the rank on your sleeve looks like a bit of fluff, and people take the mickey and try and remove it as if that's exactly what it is. And then you get up to, through flying officer to flight lieutenant, and a flight lieutenant is probably best described as a junior manager, if you guess. And then if you get promoted to squadron leader, you're then what we call a senior officer, and you start to have more of an executive role. You start to manage more and deliver less flying, more managing is the best way of putting it. And then the Air Force is quite clever at that point. You can stay at that rank if you want, or indeed the rank below it, and choose. You can choose to be a professional aviator and not seek a career path, and that's completely fine. You're constraining your rank, but you still have a kind of a pay scale that grows as your experience grows. And that's attractive to many people for obvious reasons. You get to stay doing the thing you love. But what I found was, you know, I enjoyed running the business of the Air Force as well as doing what the Air Force does. And so you go from squadron leader, and then in each rank as you go up, you tend to do one job which is front line, and then one job which is a support role. So command and non-command, we call it. So you may be a flight commander, as I was on 99 Squadron. So the second in command of a frontline squadron, people, pilots, operations, outputs. And then after that, a couple of years, you'd go, and I worked in the Ministry of Defence, where I was running, you know, urgent requirements and money and finance. And then you get promoted again. And as you go up the ranks, next is wing commander, where you be a squadron leader, a squadron commander, forgive me. So you run your own. I did 99 Squadron, C-17s, 300 people, the full fleet of A400 C-17, fabulous time. And then the next rank is crew captain. That's where you, if you're lucky like I was, you get to command your own station. It's about 7,500 people more when you add everyone who works there, not just the aviators and service personnel. Then it's, if you're still lucky, I got promoted to 1-star, where that's where we call a starred officer would be, in old money, almost like a general. It's not quite a general because, of course, it's an Army Brigadier equivalent, but you're starting now to get into what we call the senior leaders of the Air Force. And I was very lucky to be able to, I was responsible for an enormous portfolio of capability programs. We were recapitalizing the military flying training system, and we were bringing into service the A400M just when I had that job. And that was a fabulous time. You get real responsibility at that point in terms of finance, delivery, performance, all of that. And then so 2-star came along, and that's the point where we call you're on the senior leadership team, and that's when you're a general officer. So you'd be an Army Major General equivalent, or a naval admiral, of course. So and that kind of matters. By that time, there's about 40 of you total in the Air Force, which sounds quite a lot, but when you look at what people do, there's kind of diversity, and there could be people in NATO, there could be people overseas. So there's about 40 of you, and that's the rank I am at the moment. And that's kind of the point at which you're on a board. So I sit on the Air Force board. I advise on our policy strategy. I can engage across Whitehall. I can get the ear of ministers and all of that, all of the things that we need to have what I call our license to operate as an armed force in government.
Really?
So yeah, and the next rank is Marshal. There's 10 of those, and then there's one Chief Marshal, the Chief. So
wow.
I never thought I'd get to be a Vice-Marshal. But if you want a quick funny story, I was on the weakest link some years ago, which I won, by the way, just before anyone wonders otherwise. And I was a wing commander at the time, and Anne Robinson asked me, what rank do you think you'll get to? And I pulled out of thin air, Air Vice-Marshal. So there you go. I made it.
And what are your aspirations? Do you want to be in charge of the whole shooting match?
I love, this is going to sound crazy. I'm already way past any of my own expectations of how far I get. I'm motivated by the people around me and the fact that there are people above me making a difference in a job that I could see myself wanting to make a difference to. So yeah, I'm very, very happy with the state that I'm in. I'm 50, by the way. I'm not as young as you say I look. I think I look 50. But yeah, my ambition is to keep serving till the Air Force has had enough of me, and I hope that's a few more years to come.
There's a great question about what's the RAF doing to reduce its carbon footprint. So we must take that. Thank you, Richard, for that. But before that, let's go back a bit to your active service out in Afghanistan. And there's a good question from Mike Harwood, who says, Simon, there's a question. This is a question from a retired Air Vice-Marshal. Tell us a bit more about the roles our medics performed in Afghanistan, which you must have seen up close and in person when in Kandahar. And can you include what happened at Camp Bastion? I mean, just let's go back in time to, it must have been pretty torrid out there. So talk us through that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Hi, Mike. So when I was the commander of 99, it was about 2007 when Afghanistan was a particularly bloody time. Yeah. And the commitment that we make to our forces out there is that from the point of injury, you will get, I think I'm not the expert here, but broadly speaking, we will get you very rapidly to the best possible care and then to match that of the NHS. And the idea is we get you back into NHS care. And that's a commitment that's remarkably held. So when a bad thing happens, the immediate care is given by the medics at the front line, of course, and typically the troop will get airlifted back to a decent facility. It's called a Roll 2, 3. We have jargon for it, but the fact is they get brought back to a military hospital at a main base, typically Bastion or Kandahar in Afghanistan. And actually, it was Bastion where the C-17 did its thing. So there's already a team in Afghanistan doing its thing, stabilizing people, and without being funny, making it so they can be transferred back to the UK. I mean, I'm no medic, but I'm sure lots of people on this call would appreciate that before you go putting a terribly ill person in an aircraft for 8 hours, it's a good idea to make sure they're going to be able to survive that trip. But when we were made aware of what we call an aeromedical evacuation, it's all hands on deck. I mean, I can talk about a time when I was the boss, I was standing watching my children play football on a Sunday morning and the phone rings. And I'm on duty and it's my turn. And 4 hours later, you're airborne, maybe even less, to Afghanistan. And about 12 hours after watching the kids play football, you're landing at Bastion. And of course, it's because you go in daylight, not night. We normally fly at night because it's safer, right? And suddenly it's not, it's daylight. And all of that has to come into the mix. But we take the medics with us, remarkable people. They bring their kit, they'd set up the C-17, turn it into a hospital, remarkable aircraft with all of its equipment, get it ready. And then we'd land and we'd wait, because then you need to be patient. You need to let the aeromedical team go and get to the hospital, sort that transfer out. And that takes as long as it takes, right? They need to get that right. And then we just need to be ready. I mean, you'd often sit there with what we call the auxiliary power unit running or an engine running. So there's no possibility of the aircraft not starting, right? Because you need to know you're going. And we get them on board and we get them back. But I mean, we're just the bus drivers, really. You know, don't get me wrong, but a job we took very seriously. And we saw some, you know, there's pictures you will have seen in the press of the back of the aircraft looking like a very busy theatre, and it really did. And then we get the guys back to Birmingham and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital there, where they get transferred off, and you'd be absolutely knackered. So tired, in fact, that you would never fly out of Birmingham. There'd be another crew to meet you for that 20-minute flight home. You're just broken by then. And that whole, I'm sure everyone can appreciate when a pilot gets airborne with an aircraft full of stuff and people, it's very important that they're properly rested and they're not pushing it too much to the limits. But to get that particular mission done, we had to have a maximum crew duty day of 24 hours. That's a long day. And so we came up with a system of augmented crew. We'd have an extra pilot and an extra loadmaster and a proper sleep cycle. There is a decent bed on the C-17 where you can get your head down as long as you've got some earplugs and some eye masks on. And we managed it like that. But just one of those jobs, you have to get on with it. It's a bit like the question earlier about people sitting on the aircraft, is that safe? Well, we mitigated the risks in order to deliver that right down to the lowest possible. But at the end of the day, if you're going to save someone's life, then you got to go, really. But yeah, it was just an incredibly busy time.
And there were some accidents, weren't there? There wasn't a Hercules shot down, or was it one of the big American planes?
Yeah, so no, you're thinking of Hilton 22, 30th of January 2005.
Right.
That was XV 179, an RAF Hercules 47 squadron. That was in the reason I know it so well is because every air mobility pilot knows the detail of that flight in that day. That was a bit different. That was a Hercules on a different sortie in Iraq, actually.
All right.
It was shot down by indirect fire from insurgents. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody died.
And that kind of brings me on to this. Bernard Crocker says, thought you'd like to know my father was heavily involved in the design of the magnificent hangars at Brize Norton, built to house the short Belfast, and they're still standing. But, we've all seen or will remember the coffins coming out of both Iraq and Afghanistan to Brize Norton. I mean, it must have been a bit emotional, mustn't it? Flying back the fallen, as it were, from these battlefields. And can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I did a couple of those. The squadron, so the C-17 squadron did a lot of them, initially into RAF Lynham and then into Brize Norton as time moved on. And it's very much like, it's not the same. It's a bit like the aeromedical stuff that we just talked about. It was our most important mission, right? You've got to get it right. It's got to be spot on time. It's got to be done exactly correctly. And so down the back of the aircraft with the coffins, the fallen, they were never left alone. For example, we had, it was called Operation PABE. That was the code word for when we did these moves. And there were people called the PABE warrant officers. And there was a few of them who would fly out with the aircraft, and then broadly their role was to ensure that at no time was the coffin left untended. You dress the aircraft accordingly, and you get it done. And we'd fly into Brize or Lynham always exactly on time, always a smooth landing. It's the least you can do, right? And then we taxi out of sight, and then you take a bit of time at that point. You take an hour or so to get the aircraft ready. And then we had well-rehearsed, thank goodness the C-17 has a head-up display with your actual live ground speed on it. So you really can be super accurate and make sure that you taxi in and hit chocks just in time. And then you shut the aircraft down and make it absolutely silent. So once you're in and you've lowered the doors, you just make it quiet, and then you just sit quietly and you let the ceremony be completed. And yeah, very, very, very important. It's a mix of sadness and enormous pride, not in how appropriately and how respectfully and how professionally that mission was delivered. But as the boss of the squadron, of course, it's also important to me that we'd regularly have a bit of a get together as a squadron, and by which I don't mean a beer call and although we'd have a chat, get everyone in. How are you feeling? There's something about those missions that were quite punishing, Yeah, particularly when you hear the human aspect of the whole activity going on. It's yeah.
I can imagine that. Yeah. There's a question from Dinesh Bugra. Thank you, Dinesh. About what do you think medics can learn from the RAF? And I mean that in a way, perhaps focusing on the safety aspects. Because I mean we do worry a lot about safety issues and avoiding what we call never incidents. Where the wrong prosthesis gets put in for a hip or a knee on the wrong side in a patient, or other things can go wrong in medicine, just like they can go wrong in the RAF. So your safety culture must be like really, really important in the RAF, is it?
Yeah, it is. In fact, I mean, there's a lot in that question that would be worth a whole separate engagement with. I mean, if there's people out there who are responsible for that, then please reach out. We'd be very happy to discuss and share our approach to safety. I think the first thing is on safety is we have an open, engaged culture, right, where people are actively encouraged to talk about when near misses, right, when things went wrong. You need lots of reporting, you need to really understand it, and you need a balanced and fair way of dealing with things. So, bluntly, it's okay to admit you got it wrong. Okay, it's okay, and we encourage that. So that's first of all, I think, is people recognizing that. The next thing I think we do really well in military aviation is we have a system where we know whose decision it is about whether or not a risk should proceed, right? And we have peacetime, and then we have operational ways of dealing with that. So, of course, in peacetime or non-operational, the pressure's off, the bar is higher. You wouldn't necessarily want to take a risk that you would be comfortable taking when you're at home base. An example might be if you've got 4 navigation systems, all of which are redundant of each other, so there's no way you're going to have a problem. You wouldn't, and one breaks, you wouldn't leave Bryce Norton with it broken. But if you're in the middle of nowhere, you just get airborne. So there's an element of common sense. But then we have a system where when it comes to an operation and people need to make more in the moment decisions, well, that's okay too, because they do so knowing it's their decision. And to me, one of the most powerful things in aviation safety is about clarity of whose decision is it and why did they make it, and how can it be justified. And provided people are comfortable in that thing, then it's remarkable what you can achieve. But people aren't guessing, they've made a sensible risk-based judgment on whether or not something is worth it. And I think we do that really well. I mean, if you look at the example of earlier in the Afghanistan withdrawal, people will have been making operational risk judgments at that time about how many people to let on that aircraft. Well, if you have a policy in the UK that's 250 people, and then actually there's 350 people want to get on board, and there's just been an explosion and you can hear gunshots, and they're standing at your aircraft and you've got an opportunity to get them the hell out of there, well, you're going to take it. And that's okay, because you know why. So we're quite good at that, I think. And then I don't want to bore anyone with a masterclass on risk management, but we also moved to something called bow tie risk management, which is really good. We used to have crazy things of never-ending risk matrices and scoring and all the rest of it. And what occurred to the aviation community, led actually by the civil sector, is there's only about 7 or 8 ways you can actually die in the aviation sector. You can crash into another aircraft, or you can crash into the ground, or you can miss the runway. And if you focus on those things, and then what are the triggers that might lead to a situation where they happen, and then try and stop them with barriers, and then look at, well, if it does go wrong, what can you do to then limit the impact? You can end up in a really sensible conversation about risk. So, for example, if you look at the risk of mid-air collision, for example, a barrier to that might be an automatic collision warning system, which airliners have and most military aircraft have. And that makes it less likely to happen. On the right-hand side of the bow tie, we call it, might be an ejection seat, okay? If it's a single engine aircraft, well, a single pilot aircraft, well, that means that if the worst does happen, you're probably going to be okay. And we build those pictures and they get really rich and complex, but they do enable a proper conversation. So for example, when we were looking at how to get, I don't know, is it okay to land your Hercules on an airbase in the middle of the desert where they're building something? Well, what you're worried about there is if you go off the runway, are you going to hit that thing? Well, if you look at the bow tie, you start to ask yourself, well, the mitigations to that are well-trained aircrew, serviceable brakes, serviceable steering, good visibility. And so you may say, well, it's okay to carry on, but we're going to test our brakes more often. What are going to be going in daylight? And we're only going to limit, I don't know, for when pilots are well rested. I don't know, but the point is that you can look at the challenge and the risk you're taking. You can satisfy yourself you're doing everything reasonable and practicable to lessen it, and then you decide if it's worth taking or not. And as long as you're clear on whose that decision is and that you've gone through the right processes, you can get a lot done. And if you want to see the properly managed risk process, just look at the Afghanistan withdrawal.
Mm-hmm. We talked briefly, before we leave Bryce Norton, we talked briefly before we came online about Tom Cruise and that famous scene in Mission Impossible where he's strapped to the outside of the aircraft that takes off and he's actually holding on to it. I mean, that's quite a good example of risk management, isn't it?
Yeah, thankfully not my risk. So that was an Airbus aircraft and it was nothing, and it wasn't an RAF activity. But so Tom Cruise is very lucky because he's met me. They came to Bryce Norton when I was a station commander to scope that stunt, actually. So, yeah, so he flew in a helicopter to have a look at an A400M. And, yeah, it was wonderful, actually. What top guy, met all of his people. Top Gun is one of the reasons I joined the Air Force. I might have already mentioned that. So I got to meet my hero. And he was a good bloke. But, yeah, so I imagine for that day, they will have done pretty much what we did. So I'm sure that when they got airborne with him actually strapped to the aircraft, he would have had all kinds of harnesses under his costume. He would have been tied on with all kinds of Kevlar cables. He would have been wearing Kevlar or bulletproof contact lenses. You know, I have no doubt he was covered in some kind of fake skin in case he got hit by something nasty. Yeah, I guess you're right. You know, it's about, is it worth it? And are we going to do it? And what's the actual risk to life? I suspect that he was almost as safe doing that than you would normally expect if you were going flying in a normal situation. But as for risk and balance and whose decision is it, thankfully not mine.
Okay, let's change the subject because Emma Wedgeworth, thank you, Emma, for this question. What role will the RAF play in providing aircraft for the new aircraft carriers, HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales? I think the RAF's pretty proud of those carriers, isn't it? And in combination with the Navy, of course.
Yeah, so we already do provide the squadron. It's 617 squadron that's embarked right now on the Queen Elizabeth. The first Royal Naval Squadron doesn't stand up till I think towards the end of next year because the F-35 Lightning II program is still quite new. So it's hard to explain just what a team effort the carrier strike group is, but right now the F-35s are Royal Air Force Squadron, but they do have Royal Navy pilots on the squadron. And also on that aircraft carrier is the United States Marine Corps, which operate alongside us as part of the same carrier group under the Carrier Group Commander's Command. And if you look at what the Carrier Strike Group delivers, what we call fifth generation, the very latest aircraft, if we're going to have that kind of punch and that kind of capability, we need to do that together with the Navy, and the Navy need to do it together with us, and both services know it. And both services are very comfortable and proud of that. I don't know if anyone would have noted, but when Admiral Radican was doing his thing, whenever he would go to the carrier to do his thing as the first Sea Lord, invariably the Chief of the Air Staff would also be alongside. We're hugely proud of what the RAF contributes, but honestly, I'm more proud of what the Carrier Strike Group achieves and all that it's done for UK security, prosperity, capacity building, engagement. I mean, you name it. It's been a remarkably successful deployment. But of course, the fast air on board is RAF, and that's been a thing of great pride. The other thing, of course, don't forget that the Air Force is very comfortable supporting the Navy anyway. I mean, the new Poseidon sub-hunting aircraft delivered to RAF Lossiemouth, that is to protect our seas. Delivering the UK security is not a competition between the Army and the Navy. It's absolutely all three armed forces do it together. No question. I'm very proud of that.
Okay, here's a nice question from Magdalena O'Connor-Manson. The RAF has such a broad spectrum of opportunities available. What would you say has been your best experience throughout your time?
Oh, goodness me, I've had so many. I did enjoy learning to be a water skiing instructor in Cyprus, I have to say. But I don't think that's what you mean. Do you know what? There's something about, people ask me often, do I miss flying, right? And my answer is always, no, I don't. I don't miss flying for flying's sake. But what I miss is that sense of adventure and team spirit that you only get, or I've only ever had, where you get into your, in my case, a C-17 with a crew of about 8 people, a load of stuff down the back, a mission to deliver. And as you get airborne, you actually have no idea what's now about to happen. There's something really quite remarkable about where we go. So, you know, I've flown my own C-17 literally around the world, gone around the Horn of South America, up the far side, into Lima, and then across the States. I had a wonderful moment where I was privileged enough to collect a brand new $250 million C-17 off the production line at Long Beach in California. Where you get in, you talk to you address the people who built it, and it's got that new car smell, and off you go. And I mean, that's just remarkable. And then there's crazy things like just meeting people. Some of the most inspiring people I've met have been the least, when you least expect it. You know, you could come across you know, a corporal sitting in the back of an engineering facility at RAF Bryce Norton, who you've just bumped into because you decided to not follow the brief and go and talk to whoever was hiding around the back, and discover they're working on a new system to develop synthetic fuel, and they're hugely passionate and excited about something like that. So it's everywhere you look, really. We jokingly say in the Air Force that it's no ordinary job, and it, you know, it is not. It's absolutely not ordinary at all. But I couldn't put a particular moment other than that feeling. It's a feeling that you get, and it doesn't have to be getting airborne. It's often when it's you, your team, your job, and you're just told to go and get it done, and off you go. So yeah,
great answer.
The best I can do.
We're running out of time, and it's amazing how quickly time goes on these programs. Got 2 questions, actually, one from John Crode and one from Michael Schwart about drones, and will they replace pilots in the future? Do you think? Any thoughts about that? Yeah,
I think it's inevitable that they'll replace pilots in the future. The question is how long and when. I mean, they already are. We've got our new fleet of Protector aircraft coming in, and they're not manned. A lot of the effects, as we call them, that used to be delivered from manned aircraft can now be done by unmanned. And I think it is inevitable. In fact, I wrote a paper on it way back when I was a squadron leader on exactly that. And yeah, the day will come when there are no more manned aircraft, that's for sure. It's a matter of time. I mean, right now, if you look at an airliner, it can land itself, it can taxi itself, it can pretty much do its own thing. Pilots are there to make and facilitate that, and of course be there when things don't quite go to plan, and thank goodness they are. But I think there's also an element of would you want to get on an aircraft piloted automatically? And I think most people would probably say no, but it's not going to be very long before you'll happily put your family in a car that drives itself and be comfortable with that. And I think as we become increasingly comfortable with that, we'll become increasingly comfortable with it in aviation, and then slowly but surely the day will come. But I think it's decades away.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm aware that we haven't talked about climate change. There's a question about that and the carbon footprint of the RAF, and then also we wanted to talk a little bit about the Air Force and COVID, because I know you guys did amazing work in shipping in protective equipment for the medics to use. So two brief thoughts about that. I mean,
so I'll do COVID first, if I may. So we did an awful lot. I mean, there was something like 1,600 RAF people activated for what we called Operation Rescript. So we were manning vaccination centres. We had about 14 test sites we were running at one point. We were getting testing up and running at nursing homes and all the rest of it. We had A400Ms bringing people from the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, and Puma 2 doing its thing, Puma helicopters, that is, getting people to where the care was not available to the point of need. Aeromedical evacuation, but in the United Kingdom is the best way of putting that. We did lots of that. I mean, we helped. We had people helping to build the Nightingale hospitals. We were distributing PPE. I think one of the main things the military bought, including the Royal Air Force, was we put planning. We can bring a sense of planning expertise. How do you actually turn an idea into execution? The military is really very good at that, and we have good people who were part of that too. I mean, the list goes on. The only thing I would say is to recognise entirely that it was completely in support of the NHS. Okay, the credit to the effort and the admiration goes to them. And then for the logistics effort that we helped enable, it's the Army, no question. But my word, the Air Force played its part too. It really did, and we were hugely proud to do so.
Well, thank you on behalf of the medics, the NHS, and all the people that work in it, because we really needed a lot of help in the crisis times of COVID. Probably still do to some extent. So carbon footprint, I mean, that's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's COP26 going on at the moment. So, I mean, we're all hugely aware now more than ever of the importance of that. It's a bit like, but we're taking it very seriously. We recognise government targets to be net zero. We get it. We've already talked about our next light training aircraft. There is no reason why that shouldn't be electric, none at all. And we've got other irons in the fire as well. And I think what you're going to see in the next few months is more announcements about that and more things to talk about that. But it's tricky for me I don't want to duck the question, but if you ask me that question in a few more weeks, there'll be more I can say. But we definitely get it. The Air Force is committing itself to being net zero by 2040. And that's going to mean we're going to have to look at alternative fuels. We're going to have to look at solar. We've got a big estate, thank goodness me. So what can we do with, electric, generating our own power? What about carbon sinks in the infrastructure? There's loads. We know we need to get this right. And actually the most recent defence strategy and what's called Defence to Competitive Age paper describes climate change as a threat multiplier. There's just no way that the military can avoid that. And there's no way we're going to be allowed to not play our full part. And I'm certain that we will.
Simon, we're running out of time, and I get into big trouble if I don't finish on time. It's exactly 8 o'clock now. So don't go away. I've got a few announcements to make about more things that the RSM is doing, Royal Society of Medicine is doing. Tomorrow, we've got a brilliant COVID webinar with Tim Spector being interviewed by Maggie Ray. Tim's just a brilliant communicator, so do tune into that, 12:30 tomorrow lunchtime. On a week today, we've got Mariella Frostrup being interviewed by Henrietta, one of our trustees. And actually on the same day, the 17th of November, Dame Leslie Reagan is giving a talk at the RSM, and so it's hybrid. There's a webinar, but you can also come into the RSM and have a drink and meet Dame Leslie, pretty fantastic lady. And then I should finish by saying that on the 23rd of November, we've got a spotlight on antimicrobial resistance. Big problem coming down the track. There are just not enough antibiotics and bugs finding their way around the antibiotics we already have. That's a 3-hour session. There's a small charge for that. But remember, the RSM's had a hard time. I'm sure the RAF's had a hard time. Everybody's had a hard time through COVID, but we've lost well over £6 million because our building's been closed. So anybody watching this who feels generous and would like to support the RSM with the work we're doing with our webinars and our live meetings now, please do make a generous donation to us. We need the money to keep afloat. We've been around for 215 years. We want to be around like the RAF for another 215 years at least. But Simon, listen, you've been so pleasant and easy and frank and honest to interview. It's been just a real pleasure to interview. So thank you very much. Thank you, the audience, and good night and goodbye, everybody. Bye.
Take care. Thank you, everyone.